Ma! They put the cuffs on me in front of the boy. That's the part I can't shake. Not the jail. Not the lies they printed about me in the county paper. Not even the look on my daughter's face when she walked back into my life after 13 years like she was returning a library book. It's the cuffs, cold metal on his old wrists, and my grandson watching from the porch with his mouth open, the screen door still swinging behind him. He was 17 years old. I had raised him since he was 4. My name doesn't matter much for this story. Folks around Beaumont County, Tennessee, just called me Pops, even before I had grandchildren, on account of I used to coach Little League, and my hair would gray at 32. I worked 38 years at the Tilton paper mill out on Route 9 until my knees gave out and the company gave me a handshake and a pension that wouldn't cover a cat's vet bill. My wife Eunice passed in '08, lung cancer, never smoked a day in her life. After that it was just me and the house she picked up. A little 2-bedroom on Sycamore with a porch that needed paint and a maple tree. She planted the year we got married. I had one daughter. Her name was Holly. I'm going to keep calling her my daughter for most of this because that's what she was, no matter what she did. You don't stop being a father. I've tried. Holly was 26 the day she pulled into my driveway in a beat-up Tahoe with 3 kids in the back. October 2012. I remember because the leaves on Eunice's maple were that color of orange you only see for about 4 days a year. The boy in front was my oldest grandson, Ricky, just turned 4. The middle one was a little girl, May, 2.5, sucking on the corner of a juice box, and a baby in the car seat was Joseph. He wasn't even 10 months old. Holly hadn't told me she'd had another one. She hadn't called in 14 months? She got out of that Tahoe and she looked terrible. I don't say that to be unkind. I say it because it was true. She was thin in a way that was wrong, with sores around her mouth and a tremor in her left hand she kept trying to hide by shoving it in her jacket pocket. I knew what I was looking at. Every man my age has known somebody on something. I'd known her mother's brother, who I'd buried in 1988. She said, "Dad, I need a favor." She didn't say hello. She didn't hug me. I said, "Holly, where have you been?" She said, "Around. Listen, I gotta go take care of some business in Memphis. Just a few days. Can you watch the kids?" A few days. I want you to remember that phrase. A few days. I asked her where the father was. The fathers, plural, as it turned out. She waved her hand like I'd asked about the weather. She unloaded a single garbage bag of clothes, a dented can of formula, and one stuffed rabbit with a missing eye. She kissed Joseph on the forehead in a way that even then felt like goodbye. Then she handed me the keys to the Tahoe and said, "It's in your name now. Pink slips in the glove box. Sell it if you need money." I said, "Holly, what is going on?" She said, "I just need a few days, Dad. I love you." She got in a black sedan that pulled up behind her, driven by a man I never saw the face of. And she was gone before I had Joseph out of his car seat. The little girl, May, watched the road for a long time. Ricky kept asking when Mommy was coming back. The baby cried for 6 hours straight that first night because the formula she'd left was the wrong kind and his stomach couldn't tolerate it. I drove to the all-night Walmart in Carthage at 2 in the morning and stood in the baby aisle in my work boots, reading labels, 61 years old, trying to remember what Eunice had used. A few days became 2 weeks. 2 weeks became 3 months. 3 months became a year. By the second year, I'd stopped explaining to people. By the third year, I'd stopped expecting the phone to ring. I want to skip over a lot of what those 13 years looked like, because if I sit in it too long, I'll lose my place. But I want you to know a few things. I want you to know that I sold the Tahoe and put every dollar in a savings account in the kids' names. I want you to know that I went back to work part-time at the Ace Hardware on Lafayette Street stocking shelves because the pension wasn't enough for 3 growing children. I want you to know that I learned how to braid May's hair from a YouTube video, badly at first, and that she never once complained even when I pulled. I want you to know that Joseph, the baby, called me Daddy until he was 6, and then one day at school, somebody told him grandpas weren't daddies, and he came home and cried. And I told him he could call me whatever he wanted because love don't care about labels. I went to every parent-teacher conference. Every one. I sat in those tiny chairs with my bad knees, and I listened to teachers tell me Ricky was bright but quiet, that May had a gift for art, that Joseph was the kindest little boy they'd ever met. Mrs. Might, Pemberton at Beaumont Elementary, knew our whole story. So did Dr. Ostrander, the pediatrician. So did the lady who cut their hair, and the man at the corner store, and the priest at St. Matthew's. Even though we weren't Catholic, the whole town watched me raise those kids. That's important. Remember that. I had a friend through all of it. His name was Chester Yardley, but everyone called him Chess. He was my neighbor on Sycamore. 2 doors down, a widower like me, retired long-haul trucker, 68 years old when this story turns. Chess was a bad-tempered, bow-legged, barrel-chested man who cussed at his lawnmower and fed every stray cat in the county. He'd come over on Sundays and watch the kids while I picked up extra shifts. He taught Ricky how to change the oil in a truck. He bought May her first set of real watercolors. He carried Joseph on his shoulders at the 4th of July parade for 6 years running. I'm telling you about Chess now because what comes next, I couldn't have survived without him. It was a Tuesday in March of this past year. Ricky was 17, a senior in high school, 6'2", looked just like his uncle on his mother's side. May was 15 and quiet in that watchful way some girls get. Joseph was 13 and still my shadow. We'd just finished dinner, meatloaf, and I was washing up at the sink when I saw the silver Lexus pull up out front. 2 people got out, a woman and a man. The woman walked up the path in heels that didn't belong on Sycamore Street, and when she got to the porch I saw that it was Holly, 13 years older, hair done, a leather purse on her arm that cost more than my truck. The man with her was tall and pinched-looking, in a charcoal suit, carrying a briefcase. He had the face of a man who bills by the minute. She rang the doorbell of her own father's house. Ricky answered. He didn't recognize her. Why would he? He'd been 4. He came back to the kitchen and said, "Pops, there's some lady and a guy in a suit at the door." I dried my hands. I walked to the door. I looked at her through the screen. She said, "Hi, Dad." I didn't say anything. I couldn't. There's a feeling that goes through your chest when somebody you've loved and grieved walks back into your doorway, and it's not joy. It's not even anger, not yet. It's the body remembering what the mind has already filed away. Like seeing a ghost that owes you money. The man in the suit stepped forward. He had a card ready. He said his name was Royce Tannenberg, attorney at law, and he was here to discuss the immediate return of his client's 3 minor children, who, according to the documents he was holding, had been quote-unquote unlawfully retained by me for 13 years. I said, "Get off my porch." Holly said, "Dad, please. I've changed. I'm clean. I just want my babies back." May had come up behind me. I didn't know it. She heard the word babies. She heard the word babies. She heard the word back. She said, real quiet, "Pops, who is that?" I closed the door. I told the kids to go upstairs. Ricky didn't move. He had figured it out. He looked at me, and I want to tell you. The look on that boy's face is something I will carry to the grave. He said, "Is that her?" I said, "Yeah, son." He said, "Tell her to leave." But of course, it wasn't going to be that easy, because nothing in this world ever is. Within a week, we had a process server at the door. Within 2 weeks, I had a court date. Royce Tannenberg, the lawyer, had filed a petition alleging that I had taken Holly's children during a period when she was incapacitated by grief over the loss of her mother, that I had refused to return them, that I had blocked her from contacting them for 13 years, and that I had used the children to fraudulently access state benefits and her unpaid child support. None of it was true. Not a syllable. But the paperwork was thick. And the language was lawyer language. And when you're a 73-year-old man with a high school diploma reading a legal filing at your kitchen table, the words start to swim. I went to a lawyer in town named Oda Brackenridge. She was the only family attorney I could afford, and even she stretched me thin. She read the filing, and she looked at me over her reading glasses, and she said, "Sir, I have to be honest with you. The way this is written, it's designed to make a judge nervous. They're going for emergency removal." I said, "Removal of what?" She said, "The children. From your home. Pending the hearing." I went home and I sat on the porch in the dark for a long time. Chess came over without being called. He brought a six-pack and didn't open one. He just sat next to me. After a while he said, "She want money." I said, "She wants something." He said, "It's always money, Pops. People don't come back after 13 years for love. They come back for money or revenge." I didn't know it then, but Chess was right on the first guess. What I found out later, much later, is this. Holly had married a man in Houston 6 years after she left. His name was Bertram Coltrane. He was older, mid-50s, made his money in commercial trucking. He had a heart condition. He died 18 months before Holly showed back up at my door. He left a will. The will said his estate, valued at just over $4 million, would be divided in equal parts among his surviving spouse and any biological children of either spouse, provided custodial relationship was demonstrated at the time of probate finalization. Custodial relationship. 3 words. That was all this was. She didn't want my grandchildren. She wanted to be able to tick a box on a probate form. She needed the kids in her household on paper for a window of about 6 months, and then the money would clear. And after that, I have no doubt in my mind, they would have ended up in some boarding school or back on my porch like a returned package. Bertram Coltrane had stipulated it specifically because he didn't trust her, and his lawyers, the same firm Royce Tannenberg worked for, had drafted it knowing she'd have to come collect. But I didn't know any of that yet. All I knew was that on a Thursday morning, 3 sheriff's deputies pulled up in 2 cruisers, and a woman from the Department of Children's Services pulled up behind them. And they came to my door with an emergency order signed by a judge I had never heard of from a county 2 over. And they took my grandchildren out of my house. Joseph was in his pajamas. He hadn't had breakfast. May screamed. I will hear that scream until the day I die. Ricky tried to fight. He was 17 and big and angry, and one of the deputies shoved him against the wall. And that's when I lost my temper, and I said something I shouldn't have said. And the deputy turned around and put me in cuffs right there in my own living room. He said it was for interfering. He said it was for my own safety. He said a lot of things. The DCS woman wouldn't look at me. She had paperwork on a clipboard, and she kept her eyes on the paperwork. They put the kids in one car. They put me in the other. Joseph was crying so hard he was making that hiccuping sound little kids make, the one where they can't catch a breath. He's 13 and he was crying like he was 3. I sat in the back of that cruiser and I watched my house get smaller in the window. And I want to tell you, I had not cried since Eunice's funeral in '08. I cried that day. I cried that day. I cried in the back of a sheriff's cruiser like a child. They booked me on interfering with a peace officer and disorderly conduct and held me overnight. Oda Brackenridge got me out the next morning on a $1,000 bond. When I got home, the house was empty. May's bedroom door was open and her sketchbook was on the floor where she dropped it. Joseph's stuffed rabbit, the one with the missing eye that Holly had left 13 years ago and that he still slept with, was on the stairs. I picked it up and I sat on the bottom step and I held it. Chess came over. He didn't say anything. He just sat down next to me and he stayed there for about 3 hours, not saying a word, until it got dark. Then he said, "Pops, we're going to get them back. You hear me? We are going to get them back." The hearing was set for 6 weeks out. 6 weeks. 6 weeks of my grandchildren being held in some place I wasn't allowed to know, with a woman they didn't recognize, while a lawyer in Houston billed his hours. Uda told me the case was bad. She told me Royce Tannenberg had gotten 3 of my neighbors to sign affidavits saying they had concerns about my fitness as a guardian. 3. I couldn't believe it. I asked her who. She read me the names. One was a man named Virgil Osterman, who'd lived 2 streets over for 20 years and once borrowed my chainsaw. One was a woman named Lurleen Hodge, who used to bring zucchini bread when Eunice was sick. The third was a couple, the Bechtels, who'd moved in 4 years ago and I'd helped jumpstart their car twice. I drove to Virgil's house that afternoon. He wouldn't open the door. I knocked. He shouted through the wood that he had nothing to say to me. I stood on his porch and I said, "Virgil, you've known me 22 years. What did she pay you?" There was a long silence. Then he said, real quiet, "I'm sorry, Pops. I'm real sorry, Pops. I'm real sorry. The medical bills." I walked off his porch. Chess was waiting in the truck. He said, "How much?" I said, "I don't know." "Enough." He said, "Pops, listen. I want to tell you something. When I was driving long haul, I knew a guy, big-time fixer in Atlanta. He used to say something. He said, 'Money makes folks lie, but money also makes folks keep receipts. You understand?' I said, 'Not really.' He said, 'Your daughter and her lawyer paid people. People keep records. There's a paper trail. We just got to find it.' I said, 'Chess, I don't know how to find anything. I'm a hardware store clerk.' He said, 'I know, but I drove a truck for 41 years and I know every back door and motel clerk between Knoxville and Mobile. And I got a buddy at the bank.'" What Chess did next, I am not going to put on tape exactly. I will say this: he had a friend named Burwell who worked at the regional bank where Holly had set up a temporary account in her name for what she'd called consulting expenses. I will say that Burwell did not give Chess any documents. I will say that Burwell may have mentioned in passing over a beer at the VFW that there had been 3 cash withdrawals of identical amounts in the week before my grandchildren were removed from my home, and that one of those withdrawals had been deposited into an account belonging to Virgil Osterman. I will say that Chess took notes. But the real break, the thing that turned everything, came from a different direction entirely. It came from the children themselves. 3 weeks into the 6 weeks, I got a phone call. It was from Mrs. Pemberton, my grandkids' old elementary school principal, retired now. She had run into Joseph at the supermarket. He was with the foster placement woman. She said Joseph had hugged her around the waist and wouldn't let go, and had whispered, "Tell Pops I'm okay. Tell Pops Ricky has a plan." I said, "Ricky has a plan." She said, "That's what he said." That night I couldn't sleep. I sat at the kitchen table and I tried to think like a 17-year-old boy. What plan could a 17-year-old boy have, locked in a stranger's house with no phone and no car and no allies? And then I remembered something. Ricky was 17. In Tennessee at 14, a child gets a voice in custody proceedings. At 17, a judge will almost always honor the child's stated preference. Oda had told me this in our first meeting. She'd also told me it didn't matter much in our case because the kids were being painted as alienated and brainwashed by a manipulative grandparent, and the judge would likely appoint a guardian ad litem to speak for them, rather than letting them speak for themselves, unless they could get to the judge directly, in writing, before the hearing. I called Oda the next morning. I told her what Mrs. Pemberton had said. I asked her hypothetically what would happen if all 3 of those children were to write letters in their own hand to the judge before the hearing date. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Pops, that would be highly unusual, and if they did, we would need them to be able to verify the letters were not coerced, which means we'd need the foster placement worker to sign off on them being written without your involvement, which she won't, because she works for the county that took the kids in the first place." I said, "What if it wasn't a foster worker? What if it was somebody else with credibility? A teacher, a doctor, Somebody who knows the kids. She paused. She said, "Pops, what are you planning?" I said, "I'm not planning anything yet. I'm just asking." What I didn't tell her was that I had spent 13 years taking those kids to the same pediatrician, Dr. Ostrander. He'd given May her measles shot. He'd set Joseph's broken arm when he fell off the swing set in 3rd grade. He'd had long talks with Ricky about teenage things I didn't know how to talk about. And Dr. Ostrander, I happened to know, sat on the medical advisory board for the Department of Children's Services for the entire region. I went to see him. I sat in his office on a Wednesday afternoon, and I told him everything. He listened. He did not interrupt. When I was done, he took off his glasses and rubbed his eyes, and he said, "Pops, those kids have been my patients for 13 years. I have files on them 3 inches thick. Every well-child visit, every dental record, every immunization, every conversation I had with you about their development. Their school records are notarized in those files because we ran them for a sports physical last year. I can have a complete documentary record of those children's lives in your custody on a judge's desk by Monday morning." I said, "Doc, I can't pay for that." He said, "Pops, you brought my granddaughter a casserole when my wife had her hip replacement. You sit down, you let me make some calls." That was on a Wednesday. By Friday afternoon, Dr. Ostrander had reached the foster placement worker, a young woman named Tabitha Cluey, and convinced her, professionally, that the children needed an in-home medical evaluation for continuity of care. Tabitha, to her credit, agreed. Dr. Ostrander conducted the evaluation himself. While he did, his nurse, a woman named Yolanda Pritchett, who had been at his practice for 30 years and who had babysat May once when May had a stomach virus, sat with each child individually and provided them with a piece of paper and a pen. She said, "If there's anything you want a judge to know, this is your chance to write it down. Nobody will tell you what to write. Nobody will edit it. I will mail these directly to the judge's chambers myself." Ricky wrote 4 pages. May wrote 2. Joseph drew a picture of our house with all 4 of us on the porch and Chess waving from his yard. And on the back he wrote, in 13-year-old handwriting, "Pops is my dad. I want to go home. Please." Yolanda put them in a manila envelope. She drove them to the courthouse herself. But here's the thing. Here's the part that finished it. Chess had not been idle. Chess had been working a different angle. Chess had figured out, through his bank buddy Burwell, and through a man at the courthouse named Dwight, who he had known since the 70s, that the lawyer Royce Tannenberg had filed similar petitions in 3 other states in the past 4 years. Same template. Same outcome. Children removed, custody transferred briefly to a biological parent, a probate or settlement matter resolved, and the children returned to their original guardians within a year. In one case, in Oklahoma, the children had spent 8 months in foster care, while their biological mother lived in Spain. Chess took this information to a reporter at the Nashville paper, a young woman named Andrea Whitlock, Pina. She'd been working a series on probate fraud. She got very interested. She started making calls. She found 2 of the families from the previous cases. They both agreed to talk on the record. 3 days before my hearing, the Nashville paper ran a front-page story on Royce Tannenberg's pattern of probate-driven custody petitions. 3 days before my hearing. The morning of the hearing, I put on my one good suit. It was the suit I'd worn to Eunice's funeral. It still fit, because I'd lost weight in the 6 weeks the kids had been gone. Chess drove me to the courthouse in his pickup. He was wearing a tie. I'd never seen him in a tie. He looked like somebody had shoved him into a costume. In the courtroom, Holly sat at one table with Royce Tannenberg. She wouldn't look at me. Tannenberg looked tired. He'd been answering reporter calls for 72 hours. Oda Brackenridge sat with me. The judge was a woman named the Honorable Marlene Trumbull, in her 50s, gray hair, sharp eyes. She had a manila envelope on her desk. She had 3 letters in it. She had a stack of medical records 2 feet thick beside it, signed and notarized by Dr. Ostrander. She had a copy of the Nashville paper folded next to her water glass. The hearing took 4 hours. I will not bore you with the legal back and forth. I will tell you the moments that mattered. There was the moment when Judge Trumbull asked Royce Tannenberg to explain the timing of his petition relative to the probate deadline in Bertram Coltrane's estate. He stammered. He said it was a coincidence. The judge looked at him for a long time without saying anything. There was the moment when Holly took the stand and was asked by Oda when the last time was that she had spoken to her children prior to March of this year. She said she didn't remember exactly. Oda asked, "Was it within the past year?" Holly said, "No." "Was it within the past 5 years?" Holly said, "No." "Was it within the past 5 years?" Holly said, "Within the past 10 years." Holly said, "No." Oda asked if she had ever, in 13 years, sent so much as a birthday card. Holly began to cry. The judge did not look sympathetic. There was the moment when Oda introduced into evidence a photograph that I had not known she had. It was a photo May had drawn in colored pencil 3 years ago of our family, with me and Chess and the 3 kids in Eunice's maple tree, and at the top, in 12-year-old handwriting, were the words, "This is my family." May had given it to her art teacher, who had submitted it to a regional show, who had documented it. Oda had tracked it down. And then there was the moment when Judge Trumbull read Ricky's letter aloud. All 4 pages. In a courtroom that was so quiet you could hear the air conditioning. I won't tell you everything Ricky wrote. Some of it belongs to him. But he wrote about the day his mother dropped him off, and how he remembered it, because he had been holding a juice box. He wrote about his pops who had taught him to drive in an empty parking lot at the old Kmart. He wrote about his sister who was an artist, and his brother who was the kindest person he knew. He wrote that the woman who claimed to be his mother was a stranger, and that she had not earned the word mother, and that he was 17 years old and old enough to know who his family was. He wrote, "If the court takes me away from my pops, I will run. I am not threatening anyone. I am telling the truth. I will run, and I will keep running until I am 18, and then I will come home." The judge folded the letter. She looked at Holly. She looked at Royce Tannenberg. She said, "Petition denied." Then she said something else. She said she was referring the matter of Mr. Tannenberg's filings and the affidavits of the neighbors to the district attorney's office for review of possible fraud, perjury, and witness tampering. She said the affidavits, on close examination, contained almost identical phrasings, suggesting they had been drafted by the same hand and signed by people who had not actually written them. She said the timing of the petition relative to the Coltrane probate deadline raised serious questions. She said she would be issuing a written order within 48 hours. But in the interim, the children were to be returned to my custody by the end of the business day. End of the business day. I don't remember walking out of the courtroom. I remember Chess holding my elbow. I remember Oda crying, which surprised me because I hadn't thought of her as a person who cried. I remember Holly trying to catch my eye in the hallway, and me looking right past her like she was a poster on the wall. Royce Tannenberg was on his phone, walking fast. By 4:30 that afternoon, Tabitha Clowley pulled up in front of my house with the 3 kids in her county car. Joseph got out first and ran. He was 13, but he ran like he was 3. He hit me at full speed and almost knocked me down, and he sat into my shirt, over and over. "I knew you'd come. I knew you'd come." May walked up slow. She didn't say anything. She just put her arms around me and held on. Her shoulders shook. Ricky was last. He was 17, and he was a man, and he walked up to me, and he stuck out his hand to shake. I batted his hand away and I hugged him. He didn't cry, but I felt him shake. Chess stood on his porch 2 doors down with a 6-pack of root beer for the kids and a real beer for himself. And when we'd all stopped hugging long enough to notice him, Joseph yelled, "Mr. Chess!" and ran for him too. Now, I want to tell you what happened to the people in this story, because I believe you should know. Royce Tannenberg was disbarred 11 months later. He is, as I record this, under indictment in 3 states. He will likely do time. Holly, my daughter, was charged with custodial fraud and conspiracy. She took a plea. She did 14 months in a women's facility outside Memphis. She has not contacted me since her release. I do not know where she is. I do not look. I have made my peace, or what passes for it. Virgil Osterman, the neighbor who took the money to sign the false affidavit, came to my door 6 months after the hearing with an envelope in his hand. He gave it to me. Inside was $3,800 in cash, the exact amount he'd been paid. He couldn't speak. I didn't make him. I took the money and I shut the door. I gave the money to the Children's College Fund. I don't speak to him, but I don't hate him either. The world makes people do things. Lorene Hodge moved away. The Bechtels moved away too. The Beaumont County Sheriff's Department conducted an internal review of the deputies who had served the emergency order. 2 were disciplined. 1 was let go. Mrs. Pemberton, the principal, retired all over again, since she'd already been retired. She has dinner with us once a month. Dr. Percival Ostrander still treats the kids, even though Ricky and May are technically too old for a pediatrician now. He says he's earned the right to keep seeing them. He's 76 years old, and he says he'll retire when he's good and ready. Yolanda Pritchett, the nurse who collected the letters and drove them to the courthouse, came to May's high school graduation last spring. May hugged her for about a full minute. Andrea Whitlock Pina, the reporter, won an award for her series. She mentioned us in her acceptance speech. She called Chess the best source she'd ever had. Chess pretended to be embarrassed. He had the printout of the speech laminated. Chess. I have to tell you about Chess. About 6 weeks after the hearing, a check arrived in the mail from Oda Brackenridge's office. Apparently the court had awarded me certain costs and damages, and apparently a civil settlement had been reached with the bank that had held the accounts and the title company that had handled the Coltrane probate, who had not done their due diligence. The check was for $240,000. I sat at my kitchen table and I looked at that check for about an hour. Then I drove to the bank and I deposited it. Then I drove home. Then I walked 2 doors down to Chess's house. He was on his porch, which is where he always was, with one of his cats on his lap. I said, Chess, I need to give you something. He said, Pops, if it's another casserole, I'm going to be honest with you. I can't take another casserole. I handed him an envelope. Inside was a cashier's check for $100,000. He looked at it. He looked at me. He said, Pops, no. I said, Chess, yes. He said, I don't need that kind of money. I said, I know you don't. That's not why I'm giving it to you. I'm giving it to you because you saved my family. You drove around a state at 68 years old chasing a paper trail because I asked you to. You called in every favor you had. You sat with me on a porch for 3 hours when I couldn't speak. There is no number that covers that. This is just a number. The rest, I owe you for the rest of my life. He didn't take it for about a minute. Then he did. Then he wiped his eyes, which I pretended not to see. He used some of it to pay off his late wife's medical bills, which I hadn't known he still had. He used some of it to pay off his late wife's medical bills, which I hadn't known he still had. He used most of it to set up a scholarship in his wife's name at the local community college for kids whose parents couldn't help them go. He calls me up every fall to tell me how many kids got it. Last year it was 7. The kids are doing well. Ricky is at the University of Tennessee, studying engineering. He comes home every other weekend. He brings his laundry and his appetite. May graduated last spring. She's at art school in Savannah on a partial scholarship, with the rest covered out of the settlement money I put aside for them. Joseph is 16, 6 feet tall now, plays baseball. He started calling me Pops again instead of Dad because he says it suits me better. I don't argue. He's right. I'm 74 years old. My knees are worse. The maple tree Eunice planted is enormous now. I sit on the porch most nights with a cup of coffee, and I watch the street. Chess sits on his porch 2 doors down. We don't talk much because we don't need to. Sometimes one of his cats wanders over to my yard and falls asleep in my flower bed, and I let her stay. I want to say one more thing, and then I'm done. For 13 years, I raised 3 children that the world told me weren't mine. I fed them, and I bandaged them, and I sat up with them when they were sick, and I taught them what I could, and I loved them with every piece of an old man I had to give. And then a stranger walked up my porch with a lawyer and a piece of paper and tried to tell me, and tried to tell a court, that none of it counted. It counted. Every minute of it counted. The cuffs they put on me in front of my grandson. Those counted too, but not the way the people who put them on thought they would. They counted because they made my grandson stand up at 17 and write 4 pages to a judge that ended with the words, "I will run." They counted because they made a quiet girl draw a picture of her family 3 years before she needed to. They counted because they made a 13-year-old boy hug a principal in a supermarket and whisper, "Tell Pops Ricky has a plan." You can't fake 13 years. You can fake a lot of things in this country. You can fake an affidavit. You can fake a smile in a courtroom. You can fake tears on a witness stand. You cannot fake a stuffed rabbit with one eye on the bottom step of a staircase, waiting for a boy to come home. She came back for money. I had something better than money. I had them. I sat on this porch for 13 years not knowing I was being tested. Nobody warned me. Nobody pinned a notice on the maple tree that said you are about to spend the rest of your working knees and the rest of your savings and the rest of your patience raising 3 children who are not your responsibility on paper. It just happened. The way most of the important things in a life just happen, while you're standing at a sink with a dish towel in your hand. I have thought a lot since the hearing about why things turned out the way they did. I am not a man who believes in luck, and I am not a man who believes the universe owes anyone anything. What I believe is simpler than that. I believe that every choice you make is a brick, and you are laying them down whether you know it or not, and at the end you stand in the house you built. Holly chose her bricks. She chose them in a Tahoe in October 2012, and she kept choosing them every birthday she did not call. Every Christmas she did not write. She came back 13 years later expecting to find a different house than the one she had been building, and was furious to find the one she had earned. And I had been laying bricks too. I did not know it. I thought I was just getting through Tuesdays, but every parent-teacher conference, every 2 a.m. fever, every Saturday I missed at the lake because May had a stomach bug, those were bricks. They were the wall that stood between my grandchildren and a stranger with a leather purse. The wall did not appear the day I needed it. I had been building it for 13 years without looking up. What I want to say to anyone listening, especially anyone my age who feels like the world has stopped asking anything of them, is that it is not stopped. The world is still asking. It is asking quietly, in small daily decisions, who you are going to be. Be a person of your word, even when nobody is watching. Especially when nobody is watching. Because somebody is always watching. That somebody is usually a child who is going to grow up and write a letter to a judge. I want to say something about smarts too. I am not an educated man. I never went to college. But I knew my pediatrician's name and I knew my neighbor's name. And I knew which teacher had taught Ricky to read. And when the storm came, those names were a map. Knowledge is not what you read in books. Knowledge is the people whose front doors you have stood on and the favors you have done without keeping score. Build that quietly. You will need it one day. And nerve. Lord, nerve. There was a night 6 weeks ago when I sat on this porch and I thought I had lost. I thought my grandchildren were gone for good. I want you to know I almost gave up. The only reason I did not is because Chess was sitting next to me, not saying a word, and I could not stand to disappoint him. So if you are tired tonight, sit next to somebody. Do not quit alone in a dark room. Quit on a porch with somebody, and you will find you cannot quit at all. That is what I learned. That is the whole of it.